Welcome to the Inappropriate Growth Podcast. Today, we welcome Jeb Jarrell, the founder of Plentiful Wealth. With a rich background in starting businesses, launching an angel investing network, and guiding entrepreneurs through the exit process, Jeb brings a wealth of knowledge to the table. In this episode, Jeb shares his journey from early struggles and big wins to his unique takes on retirement, Social Security, and investing. He also delves into the identity crisis many entrepreneurs face post-exit and offers insights on making the decision to take outside investors. Don't miss this episode packed with valuable advice and thought-provoking topics. Let's get inappropriate. Welcome to the Inappropriate Growth Podcast. I'm Paul Angel, and I want to welcome everybody to the first episode of Season 3. Today we have Mr. Jeb Jarrell, and he's our guest. Jeb, why don't you tell us, so I don't have to do it, where you are and how you got there?
Sure thing. So right now, I manage Plentiful Wealth. Plentiful Wealth is a fiduciary fee-only financial planning firm. We work primarily with business owners to help them, starting about 5 to 10 years out from retirement, really make that transition from being a business owner to whatever their exit is, whether that's selling, internal succession plan, whatever option they're looking for, and then riding off into the sunset and helping them have a great retirement. And so that's where I am now. How I got here is a very roundabout story. A couple years in college, I didn't do so great. I had a little too much fun. I think a lot of us have been there. And so I wanted to hit the reset button, and I joined the Army. Spent a couple years living in California, learned how to speak Arabic, lived on the beach. It was a great life for a while. And then I was getting out, and I was trying to decide, where do I go next? What do I do? And it was kind of serendipitous. I applied for an internship. I left Monterey on a Thursday at noon. I got back into Kentucky Saturday night at midnight. Monday morning at 8 a.m., I had a job interview. These guys, a couple Air Force veterans, took pity on me, I think, and said, yeah, we'll hire you. We'll give you a shot and see if you can handle this. And it changed the course of my life. That was 11 years ago. I've been in the industry for the entire time since then. Worked my way from being an intern to being a financial advisor, director of financial planning. Now I own my own firm. Been doing this for about 3 years, and that's where I am.
All right. Well, can you share the story of how you started your first business and what inspired you to become an entrepreneur?
Sure, absolutely. So I've started a lot of businesses over the years. Most of them were small and didn't really do very much, but I think that's kind of the mindset. Whenever I talk to entrepreneurs, they rarely have just one business. They might have one business at a time, but they always have this idea that there are problems out there that need to be solved. And for me, when I was working for other firms, I was looking at how we were doing financial planning. And it wasn't bad, but I looked at it and I saw, I think there are ways that we can do better. And that was the impetus for starting the business. It was, how do I meet this need that's out there that people might not even necessarily know about, but it can make their life better. And so for me, it was, how do I integrate tax planning with investment management and financial planning on the whole? That was my entree into entrepreneurship. It was 2020, and we were all sitting around during COVID, and you have a lot of time to think. I was working really hard. The market was going crazy, especially early on. And my wife was pregnant. My first son came in September of 2020. And I was kind of at that tipping point where I knew that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I also knew that I was comfortable where I was. I was making good money. I didn't have they weren't forcing me out or anything, but I knew that if I stayed there for more than another year or so, I was going to be locked in. And so that was the point where I just said, okay, I need to go ahead and just saddle up and do it. And that's when I launched my firm. Launched in March of 2021. And I've been at it for about a little over 3 years now.
All right. Well, what were some of the biggest challenges you faced in those early days, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I mean, cash flow is the biggest always. And cash flow and clients, of course. For me, cash flow for the first year was savings. I saved a war chest so that I didn't have to take money out of the business. I knew that if I left money in the business, it could compound for longer, and it'd be a net positive for me. The second part of that was, where do you find clients? Because without clients, you don't have a business. And in my case, it was being out there and just grinding. I mean, social media, every networking event I could go to, shaking hands, kissing babies, whatever it took until I got to the point where I was self-sufficient. And at this point, I'm pretty comfortable, and we're still growing, and we're growing faster than ever. But it's just you have to know who is your target before you start, and that way you can be where they are and start attracting those clients and building up that client base.
Launching, I guess, what I call an angel investing network is a significant achievement, in my opinion. What motivated you to take that step, and how has that influenced things?
Yeah, so that was one of those things where honestly it was really random. I've always been interested in giving back to the community, and this was kind of another way of doing that. Uh, I really enjoy startups, working with founders to solve problems. It goes back to the whole entrepreneurial thing. Um, and so in my area in Louisville, we didn't really have a great network of funders for startups. We have a ton of great startups. They're all trying to raise money. They all need money to build, but there wasn't one place where you could go and find them, where you could go and find the money to do that. And so there's a venture capital firm here in town, Render Capital, a bunch of great folks. I got to know them through a couple different places, and their managing partner reached out to me and just said, "Hey, Jeb, we got a grant. We want to start an angel network. I think you're the guy to run it." I said, "I think that sounds great. Let's do it." It was kind of funny that, actually started out thinking I was going to be a volunteer until about, I don't know, 3 weeks in, he said, "Oh yeah, you get paid for this, right?" I was like, "Oh, okay, even better." For me, I was totally happy doing it just because I got to meet founders that were doing startups that could change the world. And I thought it was awesome. I got to network with folks who have been successful. They want to be able to invest. You have to be an accredited investor. You have to meet certain qualifications. And so for them, for me, it was great just to be able to be in the room with them and learn. So on both sides of this spectrum, I just had a blast.
Making the decision to take on outside investors, in my mind, can be kind of daunting. What factors did you consider when making that particular decision, and what advice would you give other entrepreneurs facing the same choice?
Yeah, I mean, that really is such a hard decision. And honest, straight up, I would tell most entrepreneurs, if you can, bootstrap. Don't take on outside investors, which I realize is kind of ironic coming from an angel investor. But when it comes down to it, as a founder, you own all the equity, or you own all the equity with your partner, right? You start splitting that equity up, all of a sudden you have to really grow the pie so that you still end up with more than you started out with. Um, if you have a really scalable business, say you have a SaaS startup, and okay, if I add $1 million in marketing and in employees and all this, I can take this from a $5 million company to a $25 million company. I'm just throwing out numbers, but at that point, okay, the numbers make sense that you are going to be able to take that million and quintuple the value. That's a no-brainer. But if you're a regular service business, if you're, for me, it's a financial advisor, I wouldn't take on investors because say I took on an investor for a third of my company, whatever I get is not going to justify the growth's not going to justify not having that slice of my business. It's a hard decision, but really what it comes down to is if you know that you have to have money and you can't build your business without capital, then you need to know exactly how much do you need to hit the next growth metric, whatever that is. From there, figure out a valuation based on how can I sell the smallest slice of my company for that valuation to get that cash flow, and then hit that next KPI that you need to grow, to be at. At the end of the day, you want to keep as much equity as you can, and so trying to minimize the amount that you bring in, minimize your investments, looking for non-dilutive sources of investment, whether that's loans, whether that could be grant programs, SBIR, STTR. There are a lot of options out there that are honestly going to put you in a better place long term than taking outside investor money.
I'm guessing, but I bet not everything you've done has gone perfectly. Can you discuss some of the pitfalls you encountered during this journey and how have you navigated through them?
Sure. I haven't talked about this one. I think I've told one person about this. I actually got a cease and desist from a rather large bourbon company not too long ago. It's been about 6 months, I guess. Because, anytime you start a business, you're always thinking about marketing. I don't care what your business does. You have to have marketing. You have to have sales. Again, you have to bring revenue in the door. And I had this great idea that I was going to buy a bunch of domain names. xyzcompanyretirement.com. I'm going to stay away from any specifics, but I looked on my GoDaddy account the other day and I've got 100 different domains on there. And that goes back to I have ADHD. And so I get an idea and I absolutely run with it. And my plan was I was going to optimize each of these sites to, they weren't going to look like the company site. They weren't going to be official or anything like that, but they were just going to have a landing page. So if you search for that company's retirement, you get a link to my site essentially. I had a landing page on one, and then I got a cease and desist from the company, and they said, "Hey, this is our trademark. You can't do that." I was like, "Ugh, yeah, you're right. Here, you can have your site back." So that was a learning experience. Anytime you're doing marketing, I was listening to. There's a really big attorney here in town named Jarell Isaacs. Jarell, he's known as the Hammer. He's a personal injury attorney, probably the biggest in the state. Maybe Morgan & Morgan is bigger, but one of the two. Has a huge marketing budget. And he was talking about anytime he does marketing, if he has 10 different ideas, he expects that 9 of them are going to fail. But because of power law, that one that succeeds is going to not just have a 1x return, it's going to have a 100x return. So that one thing that wins is going to offset all those failures. And that's kind of how I look at my marketing. So yeah, I have all these domain names that I can't use and I'm honestly just going to let expire. And that's totally fine. But I've got another however many different marketing ideas that if I keep trying them all, eventually one will work. I mean, I have some that work, but I'm just always looking for how do I hit what's the next stage in marketing?
Okay, well, in that vein, what's been one of your most significant wins I'm not just talking marketing, in your entrepreneurial career, and what did you learn from that?
Sure. I think my most significant win was bringing on my first employee, getting to the point where my cash flow is good. I can afford to say, yeah, come work with me for the next 5 years. Like I'm solid and I'm in a good place and it's going to be good for everybody. And so it's not a gold star like anything that most people would be all that excited about. But for me, I've never had an employee before. I've always worked in positions where I've never had someone that worked under me. No, it brought up more issues because again, I've never been in HR. I've never been a boss before. And so I've had to learn how to lead and it's a everyday process. But just getting to the point where I said, I'm comfortable with where I'm at. Like I have a real business now. I joke. So I just moved into a new office 2 or 3 months ago. I've been in business for 3 years and this is the first office that I've had that actually has windows. And so, it's those little incremental milestones that there's not one big thing where you look up and you say, oh, I've made it. Instead, it's all of a sudden you look up one day and you're like, oh, all this has kind of come together. I'm happy with where I'm at. And, even talking about the grinding, yeah, I still grind. Don't get me wrong, but it's not to the same extent. There's not that like existential dread that, oh, if I don't bring in more clients tomorrow, my company's going to go under. No, it's my biggest success is just looking around and saying, if I didn't bring on any more clients, I have a stable, successful business and I'm happy with that.
Awesome. Well, you've helped many entrepreneurs through that next step, the exit process.
Yep.
Namely, actually some law firms as well. What are some common challenges they face and how do you assist them in overcoming these hurdles?
Yeah. So this one's a little surprising for most people, that the biggest issue I see in exit planning is identity. Uh, because when you look at generational issues, right? So 51% of private businesses are owned by baby boomers. Out of those, 75% expect to sell within the next 10 years, like 49% or so expect to sell within the next 5 years. The problem is baby boomers specifically, as a generation, I see this all the time, that they have built their identity around what they do, around the fact that they own their business. And you meet someone like, well, even attorneys, right? If you meet an attorney and you say, what do you do? Like, oh, I'm an attorney. And that is a big part of their identity. Then when you sell a business, you move on and someone says, what do you do? And I was talking to someone the other day and I asked that question, and he was stopped and he had to just kind of sad look on his face for a second and said, well, I was an electrician. And so it causes this kind of existential crisis for a bit. And you have to figure out, and this is one of those things that I work with to prepare clients for, is how do you identify who you are beforehand? How do you know what's important to you? How do you know who you are apart from your business? It's a really American idea that when we go to a cocktail party and we're having a conversation, we say, oh, what do you do? That's like your first question, right? Instead of saying, oh, what are your interests? What are your hobbies? What do you do for fun? And so part of it's just being able to say, oh, I do this, but that's not who I am. That's just something I do. And so my first thing that I work with clients on is identifying who are you, and then building out a plan for the future and looking and just saying, okay, in 10 years, after you've sold your business, after you've had, your 6 months of retirement vacation, what's your next step? Because when someone retires at 60 these days, you can very possibly live till 90 or 95. We're talking another 30, 35 years. That's a whole nother chapter. And so you really have to have time to feel that. You can't just sit around and watch Judge Judy. That is going to be terrible. And so, yeah, again, my biggest thing is figuring out who are you, and then how do we take who you are now and make sure that you're going to be happy in that next chapter.
Post exit, then many entrepreneurs struggle with that identity crisis. But elaborating on this issue, because I've seen it. I mean, my grandparents were the greatest generation. My parents were baby boomers, but the greatest generation, both of my grandfathers were dead within a year of retiring.
Yeah.
So that has always, like, I have never had any interest whatsoever in retiring. I plan to work until I'm 100 because I know that as soon as I stop, I'm going to die. That's it. But baby boomers are different. They've had it easier and I say they've had it easier.
Don't ask them about that because they'll push back on it.
This issue. What's a strategy you had to employ to help people cope with that?
Yeah. So I really start out, I actually have a workbook that I go through with my clients. And it's one that I put together myself, just pulling from. So I kind of got into financial therapy for a while. I still use it as a part of my practice, and pulling from financial therapy, financial life planning, and kind of figuring out, again, just what's important to you. And I start with 3 questions. These come from a guy named George Kinder. I studied under him when I was getting my master's. And the first question is, if you won the lottery tomorrow, what would you do? How would your life change? Pretty easy. And honestly, I'm not asking my clients to tell me their answer, because the important thing is that they're thinking about this. So first is, like I said, you won the lottery. How's that going to change your life? Next up is, if you found out tomorrow that you have an incurable disease, you're going to live another 5, 7 years. One day you're just going to fall over dead. How are you going to spend your time? And so for me, this gives clarity into what's really important to you. As in, are you going to spend time with your family? If you have 5 years left, maybe you continue to work, but maybe you go and volunteer. Maybe you want to go travel, whatever that answer is. Again, there's no wrong answer here. And then the third question is, if you're on your deathbed, you've got a couple hours left to live, and you're looking back at your life, and we're talking today, what do you think that you never accomplished that you wish you would have? Because I think that's gives clarity into, like, oh, what was that most pressing thing that I really wish I would have climbed Mount Rainier, or I regret not spending more time with my kids, or whatever that is. And from there, we can take those answers and really expand on them and build them into, okay, this is how what your life can look like in retirement. And so, I think going back to work, and you made a great point. I think a lot of people, they get value from work. Some folks talk about the financial independence, retire early movement, and I can't stand it. Financial independence is great, and I think everyone should work towards that. Retiring at 35 sounds terrible because I, what would you do? And where I'm going with that is, I think a big part of our self worth as human beings is creating value. That's not saying that you have to work a job, you have to try to make as much money as you can, but helping people, volunteering, it could be, you know, spending time with your family. I think that's all creating value. And if you're, talking about your grandfather, if you just sit around, all of a sudden you go from 100%, 100 miles an hour to zero, and you don't have something to immediately step into, that's what happens. Um, and it happens all the time. It's a really, really common thing. So building out that plan, I think the plan is the most important part. Um, you know, I've had some clients that they went and started working at a golf course. They might have made $10 an hour. Honestly, the money was irrelevant. They were able to get social connection, because that's another issue in retirement, that when so many people, their friends come from their job, and when you leave work, all of a sudden you lose that identity of your who you are, but you also lose your social network.
Unfortunately, but a lot of marriages get extended because you are
Mhm.
able to leave the house and go to work, just like you can leave
Yep.
work to go to the house. And after absence makes the heart grow fonder or something,
No,
I know a lot of
absolutely.
people get retire and their marriage goes to hell.
I I can count probably half a dozen times where one partner has gone back to work in retirement just to get out of the house for that very reason. Where one spouse will look and say, "You got to do something." And this also goes back to the type of person that becomes an entrepreneur. Again, if you're always looking for problems to solve, and typically entrepreneurs have high energy. They have gone hard for the last 30 or 40 years to build that business. That's not easy. And so you can't turn that off. You don't retire and then all of a sudden you're a different person. And so you have to have an outlet for that energy. And so I think that's, again, I recommend volunteering for a lot of people. I volunteer a lot. I work with a nonprofit called St. John's Center for Homeless Men. And for me, it's great because you can go and put your skills that you learned for the last 30 years, however long, and put them to work for a greater cause. Angel investing was kind of the same way, that we had a lot of retired senior executives from health. There's a large healthcare company here in town. They joined because they spent 30 years of their career building a healthcare company. They know that industry. They know how to be effective in it. And so when they were looking at startups, they were able to not only invest in the startups, but they were also able to be advisors and actually kind of shepherd them through the process, through the growth process. And so again, it's putting your skills to work. And so that you don't feel like you're just, an old racehorse put out to pasture with nothing to do. Instead, you're still creating value. You're still giving back, and you're still building a better world.
But I'm kind of reading the room. I don't think you're close to the end of your entrepreneurial journey, but looking back, I don't think you're
Yep.
close to halfway. But looking back, is there anything you would have done differently in the journey so far?
Honestly, no. Um, I've made mistakes. Don't get me wrong, but uh, I'm a believer that if I hadn't made those mistakes, I wouldn't be where I am right now. And so, yeah, I think back to, should I have launched a firm earlier? Should I have waited? Should I have, all those what ifs? And at the end of the day, I'm happy and I'm content with where I am right now. And so, even for the mistakes that I made, they were learning experiences. If I had launched a firm 2 years earlier than I did, honestly, I might not have had the experience that I needed to be successful. And so when I go through all those things, yeah, I wouldn't do any of them differently. I'm perfectly happy with where I am today.
Well, that's not something I hear a lot. So congratulations on that.
you
As
know,
far as
I,
the future, what is your vision for the future? And I'm talking about yourself and the entrepreneurial community. What trends or changes do you foresee in the whole startup ecosystem?
So I think in the startup ecosystem, we're kind of going through a pretty big change right now. When you're looking at how interest rates have changed over the last 2 years, that's put a lot of pressure on companies that are looking to go public. So your late stage Series C, Series D startups. Uh, on the front end, you're seeing Facebook, Amazon, Netflix. A lot of the big companies, they've also laid off a lot of engineers. So there's a lot of people who have said, I've got a great severance package. Maybe now's a good time to launch a startup. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how those larger companies transition from being public or from being private to going public. And then on the short end, I think when you combine both uh, engineers that don't have a job that have an opportunity now, their opportunity cost is much less with the tools that are available through AI. When you look at ChatGPT, when you look at Microsoft's Azure, AWS, or any Claude, any of the big fundamental large language models, it is so much easier now to build a minimum viable product. You can build a startup in a weekend and say, yeah, I'm hooking in your data to ChatGPT to fine tune it, and then this is what your outcome is. And these folks that already have those skills, they can do that really easily. Personally, I don't have those skills. I'm learning, but it's a work in progress. And so I think we're going to see over the next 10 years, one of the things I'm really interested in is seeing, okay, businesses that are built from the ground up to embrace AI. Right now, it's kind of an afterthought. When you look at most large companies, some are embracing it, some aren't. It's kind of it's figuring out both what can it do, but then also there are the folks that are pushing back on it because they're looking at their jobs are feeling threatened. Whereas, like, if I use this as an example in a newsletter last week, if I worked for H&R Block as a tax preparer, I would be worried because there is so much data out there that you can train a model fairly well for simple returns and cut out so much of that. So any kind of data transcription, any kind of data, just simple data jobs, I would be worried. I think that's going to be really interesting. I think when we're looking at the energy sector, that's another really interesting place because it goes back to the data centers. It goes back to AI. If you run a search on Google versus a search through ChatGPT, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it's 30 to 40% more energy, more more expensive energy wise to run one on ChatGPT. And so when you're, or maybe it's three times. Either way, it was a significant amount. And so our current grid right now can't support that. When you're looking in Northern Virginia specifically, they're building data centers all over the place. And what they're constrained by is the access to electricity. And so until we can build a bigger grid, that's a more robust grid, that's going to be an issue. That's also bringing into question, where's that energy coming from? Right now, we've over the last 20 years, we've been in the midst of this transition from fossil fuels to renewable energy. And honestly, I think that's going to kind of change things there because all these data centers are fed by electricity. And so if you have solar, which solar's great, I'm not against it at all, but you're seeing a couple headwinds to that.
It can't
One,
compete with with
with coal.
oil and gas and coal
Yeah,
and
absolutely. You can't compete when you're also looking at the tariffs that are being levied on solar panels coming from China, which is where we get most of our cheap solar panels. That's another headwind. Donald Trump is very possibly going to be back in office here in a few months, and then that's another headwind with tariffs. And so there's a lot of headwinds there. Whereas you look at coal plants over the last 10 to 15 years, there have been issues in permitting new coal plants. There have been issues in keeping old ones going. But we're kind of seeing a pushback in that because companies are looking and saying, hey, we have to have this capacity. This is the best option for that. I think it'll be interesting to see if we have nuclear, a resurgence in nuclear energy. And realistically, long term, that's probably one of our best options. We're not talking the same nuclear energy of Chernobyl in '86 or 3 Mile Island, all those issues. Nuclear energy has come a long way in the last 30, almost 40 years.
that's pretty much the cleanest form of energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest issue you run into there is after the nuclear, the leftover nuclear waste after the uranium is depleted. But there are ways to go around that where, we have some solutions there. So nuclear is going to be interesting. And then my third leg of the stool is manufacturing. Again, we're seeing our world change from a unipolar world in which the U.S. leads everything to more of a bipolar world in which, kind of like the Cold War between USSR and America, now it's China versus America. And so I think it's interesting to see, as we see less and less, as trade becomes more expensive. Over the last 50 years, transportation became so inexpensive that you could build supply chains in a just-in-time format so that you order something from China, whatever part that is, whatever piece of electronic that is, it shows up in a month. You know when it's going to be there. It's reliable. It's cheap. It's awesome. But as we've come closer to the trade war that we already are in, it, trade's becoming more expensive. When you look at the cost of shipping, that has gone up substantially. When you look at the everything's going on in the Middle East, where instead of transiting via the Red Sea, a lot of companies are actually shipping all the way around the Horn of Africa, and that's adding an extra 7 to 10 days to the shipment time, and that's adding extra costs, and that's going back to inflation. All these things kind of point to the idea that we're going to have manufacturing back in America at some point, and I think sooner rather than later. And so, looking at AI, I think that's a really interesting opportunity to say, okay, if we're going to build a factory from the ground up, how can we integrate technology? How can we integrate AI to automate a lot of these low-end processes that don't necessarily need a human being to oversee every step? That's also going to be good for some of our trading partners. Mexico will probably do very well because of that. If you look at Colombia can handle a lot of the lower end stuff. I think we're going to see a big shift in our supply chain across the board. So yeah, really, where I think the industries are going, I think there's going to be a lot of tectonic level shifts over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think AI has the potential to change things much the way the internet changed things. I mean, I was in my mid-20s when AOL hit, everybody had an email address for the first time. And
Oh yeah,
in business, I mean, you could see there were people in business that were resistant, letting people have computers and access to the internet at work. What are they going to do? Watch fashion shows and check out ESPN.com. And there wasn't social media yet, but they had it was all porn and time wasters. And, nobody saw it as a business opportunity. But then email kind of came about, and then networking just went there. And then eventually you had people who had never existed without the internet. So eventually there's people now that will have being born right now that it doesn't take long. I mean, my youngest son's in college, but he was born in 2004. 2004 doesn't sound like it was that long ago. Somebody wants to get in touch with you, wants to hire you, wants to beat you at golf, wants to come to Louisville. What's the best way to get you and to start a conversation?
Yep. So the easiest thing to do is send me an email, jeb@plentifulwealth.com. It's just JEB, super simple. You can check out plentifulwealth.com. And for anyone that's interested, I mentioned the retirement planning, just the guide to the next chapter. I can provide a free copy of that to any of your listeners that are interested. So I'll give you a specific link for that you can drop in the show notes.
Great. Well, Jeb, I appreciate you coming on today. I learned some stuff. I loved everything that I'm hearing. To our listeners, thank you for listening. And please remember, if you want to grow, chances are you're going to have to do something inappropriate.
Thanks, Paul.